Now we talk about transfer portal and how it's impacting college football. You look at what Vanderbilt's been able to do. You look at what Arkansas was able to do this weekend. A team that got a good amount out of the portal that hasn't seen the returns, even though they probably needed one more addition, is the Auburn Tigers. What's the state of Auburn right now, in your opinion?
They got to win. Got to win some games. So Missouri, Kentucky, Vandy coming up. Got to win a couple of those. Win a couple of those, and I think everything settles down. Look, is this going to be the greatest Auburn season of all time? Absolutely not. You know, they're sitting there at 2-4. They need to go 4-2 to make a bowl game here. So you think about that. That means you'd have to you think they're going to beat ULM, but then you've got to beat 3 of what I just said: Missouri, Kentucky, Vandy, Texas A&M, Alabama. Like, that's not going to be easy.
Right.
It's not going to be easy at all. But listen, even 5 and 7, if this recruiting class stays together, I think they're going to be fine going forward. You know, the Deuce Knight flip, we definitely saw it coming. I do think you still maybe go after a quarterback in the portal, just in case Deuce Knight's not ready, just in case Walker White's not ready. Like, that was my biggest thing with Hugh Freeze not taking a quarterback out of the portal this year, because he's saying, well, it's not worth the money. And it's not your money. It's somebody else's money. Spend it.
Right.
If it makes your team better, spend it.
Right.
Or it might make your team better. Because I guarantee you he's sitting there. Like, I saw him on the sidelines yelling at Peyton Thorne again during the Georgia game. Like, you could have had a different situation. You could have increased the competition level in that quarterback room. You chose not to. But I do think unless it just falls apart and they lose all, like, if they lose the next 3 games, it might fall apart. I'll be real with you here. Like, even though we just saw Vandy beat Alabama, like, you shouldn't let Vandy come in and beat you. But it's Diego Pavia, who we've now seen beat Alabama, and we saw him beat Auburn last year with New Mexico State.
Man.
So you can't lose all those games, because then you do have, I think, a problem where the vultures start coming into the recruiting class. I wrote this before the Georgia game, between the Oklahoma game and the Georgia game. I went on the Auburn message board and I said, listen, a lot of what I'm seeing from you guys reminds me of the discourse around Billy Napier in Florida a year ago. And a lot of that was, well, he's got this class coming in. You got to protect the class, and don't worry about right now. That class is coming. It's going to save everything. Well, the Florida fans got so focused on DJ Lagway, the quarterback in that class, they forgot about everything else. And Auburn actually played a big role in picking that class apart. Texas did a little bit of it too, and there was some. But by the end of the cycle, by the time signing day rolled around, that class had basically been strip mined. They got DJ Lagway and they got LJ McCray, the edge rusher. Everybody else in the top 200 had gone somewhere else. And now you're looking at Billy Napier, and he doesn't have that foundation that he'd promised. He's got the quarterback, but that doesn't matter because they're not winning. And there's no hope of winning, like, against the better teams in the league. So the decision's essentially been made at Florida. Like, if Hugh Freeze wants to keep that from happening to him, he has to keep this class together. He has to make sure that this roster is better next year than it was this year, because that's what Billy Napier didn't do. He did not make the roster any better. In fact, he let it get worse. If Hugh Freeze can make this roster better, they're going to be okay. But they've got to keep that class.
Right now, okay, I always like to tell you to be the coach. All right, I'm doing it again. What are you saying at 2-4 to your class? What are you telling Malik Autry, the 5-star, who's definitely going to be looking at this Ohio State-Oregon game, who Ohio State is on? What do you tell, like, a guy like Deuce Knight, who Ole Miss is still like, hey, man, you see what we're doing? Yeah. You see what we're doing? Do you want to go to that train wreck? What do you tell these guys?
Watch us. Now, this is a gamble, by the way. This is a gamble. Watch us. We're going to get better as the season goes on. You don't even have to promise a lot of wins. Like I just said, if you go 2-1 against the next 3, you beat ULM, and then maybe you beat A&M, or at least you play them tough, and you play Alabama tough. they're going to be fine with that. They're going to be like, okay, I see it. You're competitive. The roster's getting better. You're going to have the quarterback next year, assuming, Deuce stays. That makes sense. This makes sense. Where it will not make, this is why it's a gamble. Let's say you do lose the next 3. That's when you say, oh, you told me to watch you.
Right.
I watched you. You fell apart.
Right.
I'm gone. And that's going to happen. Like if they keep losing, it's going to happen. So they got to win some of these next ones. I would say 2-1 over these next 3, and they should be feeling okay. Yeah. They've got to break through and have that game. Like you look statistically in the Oklahoma game, like you look at the box score and you're like, how did Auburn lose this game? Well, you know how they lost the game. They threw a pick 6 at the worst possible time.
Right.
Like the Arkansas game, 4 turnovers. That's why they lost the game. The Cal game, 4 turnovers. That's why they lost the game. If they can clean that up, they can beat Missouri and they can beat Kentucky and they can beat Vanderbilt.
Right.
They might not beat them all in a row, but if they could, that'd be even better.
Right. You run off 3 wins. It's totally different.
You're feeling very different. Everything looks better. Even if you don't wind up, in a bowl game, but if you win these 3 and you beat ULM, you're in a bowl game too. Like all of that becomes possible.
I feel like we're missing the game. I think does Auburn have Mississippi State?
Am I missing that one? They've got Kentucky.
Okay,
Missouri, Kentucky, Vanderbilt, 3, ULM, Texas A&M, and Alabama.
No, that's it. That's 6.
That's the 6. Yeah.
Golly.
The A&M the week before Bama is brutal because, especially if you look at the way A&M's playing now, I think we're all kind of realizing, ooh, they're pretty good.
Le'Veon Moss is a handful. Good gracious, and when they're able to stretch the field with Wagner. It gets different. Like last week, I'm like,
and Bussey's one of the best freshman receivers in the country, which, you're going to get pushed down the list in a year when Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams are freshmen, but he was what Texas A&M needed. They didn't have anybody like that. I mean, Evan Stewart was supposed to be that, but they didn't exactly get that out of him.
Let me ask you, speaking of wide receivers, Cam Coleman, his performance, when you see him, now we know he can do some freakish things, but he hasn't really had the opportunity. At this point, if you're Hugh Freeze, do you just excuse me? At this point, if you're Hugh Freeze, do you just start kind of loading him up with the ball and more opportunities to kind of help keep this class together? Like, is it time for a youth movement in Auburn?
I don't even think you do it to keep the class together. I think you do it because he's one of your best players.
Yeah.
And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. I mean, Florida tried to do that with Eugene Wilson III last year against Tennessee, and he ended up getting hurt. He ended up hurting his collarbone, and then they couldn't really do it the rest of the season just because he was coming back off an injury. It was hard to kind of slip him back into the flow. And so, but when you have a talent like Cam Coleman, feed him and see what happens. I mean, that's what I go back to when I covered the Urban Meyer teams back in the day at Florida. When they had Percy Harvin as a freshman, Meyer was getting frustrated with his usage. Didn't feel like they were getting him enough touches. They just moved him to running back and handed him the ball. Like they just wanted to put the ball in his hands any way they could. And when you have somebody who you think is special, you put the ball in his hands.
Yeah, that's kind of like what they're doing with 11. Malcolm Simmons. Like now you're starting to see him get some jet sweeps. You're seeing him in different levels of I'm seeing him on special teams. I saw him running down a punt the other day. Like a guy who's that freakish athletically, you have to figure out a way to get it done. Have you seen any improvement in Peyton Thorne?
I think so. Because I thought he was improved the Oklahoma game until the pick 6. I was like, oh, he's fine. Like,
right.
This is going to be okay. And, obviously the Georgia game didn't go the way they wanted to, but that's Georgia. Like Georgia is a lot more talented than them right now. This Missouri game will be a really good test because you saw Missouri just go get annihilated by Texas A&M. Missouri has some good players, but they don't have the pieces they had last year. Like defensively, they don't have the level of talent they had last year.
Yeah.
So,
and the guy calling is gone too, right?
On the defense, yes, he's at LSU now. So, so Auburn should be able to move the ball. If they can avoid mistakes, they can win this game. And how big of a win would that be for them? It would be huge because I think this is one that at the beginning of the season, you looked at it and you're like, oh, at Missouri, that one's going to be pretty tough. Well, now you've dropped some ones that you thought you were going to win. This is a chance to get one back that you thought maybe you wouldn't have